Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Give Us Our Daily Bread Food, Farmers, and Climate Change webinar. I hope everyone is doing well and that the weather is cooperating with you. I know that in some parts of the country it has not been a very nice few days. Today, we are going to look into the issue of how climate change is impacting agriculture and our capacity to grow our food. We will be looking at it both from the global macro level as well as from the on-the-ground perspective. I am getting some folks saying that they're not hearing things. They may have a problem with their audio, with their Wi-Fi. I will write this down in a message later. But for right now, if you're not being able to hear it well, it's your audio, and you may want to switch to your phone if you're using a Wi-Fi. I am Paz Artaza Regan, Creation Care Team's Program Manager at the Covenant. For those not familiar with Catholic Climate Covenant, our mission is to inspire and equip Catholic people and institutions to care for creation and care for the poor. Through our 15 national partners, we guide the U.S. Church's response to climate change by educating, giving public witness, and offering resources such as the webinar you're on today. Before we get started, though, let us take some time and join in a prayer. I have chosen a short prayer from Catholic Rural Life's Calendar of Blessings, which I thought was appropriate. Let us take a moment to remind ourselves that we're in the presence of God, even during this webinar. Creator God, you formed the human in your image to be partner with you. You have blessed us by calling us to work with the land and its creatures, providing nourishment and health for all. Let your word now take root in our hearts and lives to produce a rich harvest of justice for all creation. Let all who work with the land be blessed with dignity, their homes blessed with health, and their labor blessed with safety. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. We have some important information before we get started. It's what I call the housekeeping. The video is being recorded and will be sent to everyone who has registered. We will have a 15-minute question and answer session at the end of both presentations. You may submit questions by writing them in the chat box on the lower left side of your screen. You may need to scroll down to see the box. If you have audio issues, as I said, it's most likely due to your Wi-Fi connection. You may try connecting via phone. At this point, let me welcome both of our presenters. We have two folks with us today that I'm very pleased that they are consented to be our presenters. They're going to go in order. First, it's going to be James Ennis and then Ron Rossman. And let me give you a short introduction to both of them before we get going. I'm getting a message that people say that the webinar keeps dropping. That is an issue with your Wi-Fi connection. It is unfortunate that sometimes Wi-Fi goes in and out. Jim Ennis is Executive Director of Catholic Rural Life, a Catholic nonprofit organization that serves the rural church in the U.S. for over 93 years. It develops rural leaders through education, advocacy, and outreach programs. He also serves as the president of the International Catholic Rural Association, based in Rome. James is an adjunct professor at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. He's worked in both the nonprofit and for-profit sectors, also with 3 Fortune 500 companies, before moving to the nonprofit sector where he has worked for the past 22 years, 9 of them promoting sustainable agriculture. He's earned a Master's of Business degree from the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management and a bachelor degree from the University of California, Davis, where he has studied agricultural and managerial economics. A native of California, James is married with 5 children and now lives in Minnesota. The second presenter is Ron Rossman. He is an organic farmer near Harlan, Iowa, which is on the western part of the state. He's been farming for 44 years. He has a 700-acre farm that has been organic since 1983 and certified organic since 1994. The farm is truly a family farm, where he runs it with his wife and 2 of his 3 sons. Ron has a Bachelor in Science degree from Iowa State. Ron's wife operates the Rossman family farm meat label business and also owns and operates a general store that consists of 1,500 items. His son and wife also own and operate a local foods restaurant in Harlan, farm-to-table delivery service, and have an egg layer operation. Ron is a founding member and past president of Practical Farmers of Iowa, which is dedicated to on-farm research, sustainable agriculture, and sharing information with other farmers. He's the past president and board member of Organic Farming Research Foundation, and he's currently a board member of the National Catholic Rural Life Organization. His family is very involved in a local parish, working to keep the rural parish vibrant. I'd like to join both James and Ron, and at this point, I should have been at this slide, so you can see photos there of James and Ron. We're going to get started first with James, and when James ends, it'll go to Ron. James, it's up to you now.
Thank you, Paz. Well, welcome everyone. Today, I would like to cover how U.S. agriculture, and I will focus my comments on the United States primarily in this particular session, since we have just a short time together, and how U.S. agriculture is impacted by climate change, and also what Catholic Rural Life is doing to respond to the impacts of climate change on farmers, especially family farmers. Just going back to my slide here, there are just some overview related to agriculture in general. For those of you who don't know, there are approximately 2.2 million farms in the United States. About 89% of those farms are smaller family farms, and the other 11% are large agricultural operations. Agriculture covers approximately 915 million acres in the United States, a very significant number, and its impact on the environment cannot be underscored enough. But also agriculture contributes significantly to our United States economy. Gross cash farm income last year was approximately $353 billion. And if you add in other food-related businesses, it adds up to nearly $1 trillion for our U.S. economy, or 5.5% of our gross domestic product. And it provides more than 21 million jobs in the United States. Another point I just want to make is that the market value of crops and livestock, crop production, livestock production, are close to 50-50 in terms of percentage contribution to that $353 billion that I mentioned above. So both livestock operations and crops are really important to our economy. Now, agriculture is a complex web of relationships. And what's happening with a change in climate is impacting all these relationships, and especially in terms of agricultural productivity. It affects crops and livestock's development and yields, and also impacts the ecosystem and the services that ecosystem provides. And I'll go into a little more detail. A lot of my comments are coming from a USDA report, Climate Change in Agriculture in the U.S. Effects and Adaptation, which is available on the USDA website. So just to remark here is that the relationship between climate and agriculture is very tight. But I wanted to first highlight just some observations regarding a changing climate. And just some very significant points. For instance, one, global average temperature has increased 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit over the 20th century, over the past century. And a change in temperature can dramatically impact the crops that are grown in the United States and in different regions of the country. A second point is 10 of the 11 warmest years on record have occurred since 2001. So we're seeing this gradual increase in temperature, which is then obviously going to impact agriculture in a significant way. And I'll just talk about those impacts. 3 is that winter temperatures have increased more rapidly than summer temperatures. So the observed number of record high temperatures is 3 times as high than record cold events. So we're seeing a warming in even winter temperatures, which is also impacting seasons and the timing of crops and plantings and so forth. Now, this slide is a little complicated. I highlight it because that there are selected significant climate anomalies and events here highlighted on this particular screen. And this comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But just a couple of points, you'll see Alaska up over on the left-hand side of this photo. But Alaska has been experiencing some received just a 23.4 millimeters of precipitation in April. And that's the second driest in April on record. And what we're seeing is a dramatic impact in terms of what's happening with glaciers in Alaska. We're also seeing impacts of temperature and there are record and near record warm conditions that were observed across eastern contiguous United States, resulting in the 11th warmest April since these records began in 1895. This is just, and I could go through the whole chart, but just to highlight the impacts of climate and climate events that are occurring. These are observations, these are scientific observations. But now let me get into some of the detail, and I want you just to hang with me as we go through this briefly. But just the effects of temperature on crops and crop development. Each crop species has a given set of temperate thresholds that define the upper and lower boundaries for growth and reproduction, along with optimum temperatures for each developmental phase. So plants are currently grown in areas where they're exposed to temperatures that match their threshold values. As temperatures increase over the next 50 years, which they are predicted to do, shifts will occur in crop production areas because temperatures will no longer occur within the range during the critical time period for optimal growth, yield of grain or fruit. So for example, a critical period of exposure to temperatures is the pollination stage. So that's when pollen is released to fertilize the plants and trigger development of reproductive organs for fruit, grain, and fiber. These thresholds are typically cooler for each crop than the thresholds and the optima for growth. The pollination is one of the most sensitive stages to temperatures and exposure to high temperatures during this period. So just that change in temperature can affect the yields and development for plants. We're also seeing carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere that have increased rapidly since the measurements began back in 1958. And because of the enhanced atmospheric CO2 concentrations that stimulate photosynthesis and plant growth, much work has to be focused on determining the responses of crops and weeds to elevated CO2 in our atmosphere. And that response varies depending on the species. But this variability is related to photosynthetic biochemistry, and these elevated CO2 levels are impacting crops across the country. A third part is the severity of pest pressures and pollinators. So geographic ranges of insect pests are limited by the presence of plants which they feed on. So pests are in certain parts of the country, particular pests, because they feed on plants, and then they also can impact crops in a negative way. And the insects are able to survive winter temperatures. If their temperatures are warming up, then we see movement among these pests into different regions of the country. And that's impacting our agriculture and crops especially. And as temperatures continue to change with humidity, then plant diseases also spread and change. So these are the challenges that farmers are faced with in terms of seeing changes every year in weather. It also affects animal agriculture, livestock development. So what we see is feed, grain production, availability is changing with the change in water, precipitation, and weather patterns. And so ranchers and others who are using grazing as a strategy also are having to adjust the pastures and forage crop productions and manage that in a way that can feed those animals in a timely manner to prepare them to go through processing. But also, animal health is impacted too by these changes in temperatures. And so, for instance, animals, and it depends on the species, they have core body temperatures that they perform well at certain temperatures, but any deviations, significant deviations, can impact both their ability to produce meat, milk, or eggs, and also it impacts their fertility too, and limit the animal's ability to reproduce. So these are changes that also in livestock production, that climate change impacts their ability to develop the livestock in a way that is bringing it to market in a timely manner. And also just managing new diseases and pest distributions as climate changes in different regions. So this is how these interrelationships impact and continue to affect the farmers and the ranchers. Climate change also has effects on soil and water. And on the soil is foundational for every farm, is healthy soils. And so this is extremely important. Erosion is a primary source of what we see happening there's a floods, or there are challenges with row crops and certain types of agricultural production practices where there's a lot of erosion and soil moves into rivers and streams, impacting negatively upon those other water bodies. But as climate changes, we're seeing some regions experiencing greater drying with droughts. And that's also having an impact on erosion and on water quality as well. So for instance, in California just went through a 5-year drought. And there was groundwater that was impacted both from aquifers being depleted, as well as the impacts of nitrogen and phosphorus used on the lands going into the surface waters and then also into the groundwater. But with climate changing, with droughts having an impact on the landscape that can also then impact water, and farmers obviously need water to be able to provide for their crops and for their livestock. And in California, as just an example, they are really looking at long-term trends and what's happening in California to address the significant water issues that they have been facing. Now, the concerns for agriculture, water, climate change, and food security aren't just concerns in the United States, but also internationally. So I took a group of farmers, and this is a photo that we took with the assistant to the Secretary of State, Monsignor Peter Wells at the time. He's now the Archbishop in South Africa, but he was the assistant to the Secretary of State's office, and he is originally from Oklahoma. And he shared with us and this group of farmers how critical agriculture and food security are to the Secretary of State's office, and climate change and its impact on agriculture, water, and food security were extremely high priority issues within the Vatican dealing with the church across the world. And so these farmers were very impressed to hear also the church's concerns for these issues. Now, I just want to talk about adaptation for a moment. Adaptation is a critical element. U.S. agriculture has demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt to changes, and crop and livestock production practices have expanded, and they've expanded across the country. They've responded to variations in climate and other natural resources, and dynamic changes in agricultural knowledge, technology, and markets have occurred over that period of time. So the challenge with the United States is farmers adjusting to these different conditions. But other farmers in other countries don't always have access to effective options. They don't necessarily aren't able to change crops or change agricultural practices as quickly as in the United States and maybe some other developed countries where there are resources and support to help in those changes. So, for instance, in the United States, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has invested lots of taxpayer money into research and working with land-grant universities to support farmers in making changes in agricultural practices, developing and implementing more sustainable farming practices. For instance, at UC Davis, what's happening there, we have a plant breeding center there at UC Davis where it says the scientist is talking, he says it can take up to 10 years to develop a new crop variety, even more perennial plants. So we have to extrapolate what the future will bring very, very quickly. And this was in the context of an interview where the UC Davis Plant Breeding Center Professor Charlie Brummer was talking about the changes in making and helping develop more crop-resistant seeds for farmers in the Central Valley of California. So there's incredible investment that we see from farmers, from the land-grant universities to help support farmers in the United States, and we're blessed with that. But there are farmers in other parts of the world that don't have that support, and that's extremely challenging for them to adapt to and to look at more effective options as climate changes in those particular regions. And that's something that the international church is really concerned about, is how to help farmers in other parts of the world as well. But this adaptation strategy, every land-grant university that I've visited, University of Minnesota, Iowa State University, Michigan State University, UC Davis, across the spectrum, Purdue University, we've got these land grants investing in and helping support their local growers through their extension to make adaptations to help address changes in climate and weather patterns in their particular regions of the country. And that is happening, and we're investing millions and millions of taxpayer dollars across the country in adaptation strategies. Now, what can be done? The complexity of these challenges will call forth humility and dialogue. And as a faith-based organization, Catholic Rural Life suggests 3 points here. One is humbly listening to the message of God, our neighbors, and creation itself becomes the ultimate way through which these challenges will be met. And listening in terms of what is happening in our world. If we do believe that the earth is a gift, that we need to care for it in such a way, and if things are happening as a result of our activity, we need to be thoughtful and more thoughtful of how we're impacting the environment. Secondly is a dialogue with God in prayer and contemplation, a dialogue with our neighbor in justice and solidarity, and even a dialogue with creation in humility, wonder, and gratitude. And this is, again, just bringing us to prayer, but also having a dialogue with others. And an ecological conversion, a greater understanding of integral ecology, the human and natural ecology, how they intersect and the impact. And this is what Pope Francis was promoting in his encyclical Laudato Si. Now, Catholic Rural Life has initiated a program called the Vocation of the Agricultural Leader. And the purpose of this is to develop a resource offering key principles for agricultural leaders, showing how to apply ethical principles to day-to-day operations, affirming and honoring the role of farmers and ranchers, but also informing ethical management decisions to take the environment into account for current and future generations, and inspiring the next generation of leaders, men and women who want to enter into agriculture. And so in this document, we highlight this unique vocation. It's one of the first vocations. It's an extremely important role that farmers play. But also, secondly, is the importance that farmers have a responsibility to care for the environment and to care for it in a way to last for future generations. And we just had a couple key principles: gratefulness for the natural resources, and that farmers have this attitude of gratefulness and always being looking to God for in thanksgiving for this gift, but also looking as a stewardship at how to care for it, and being generous to others and to share this with food with others around the world as well. Catholic Rural Life is affirming and protecting family farms. Food security and food sovereignty are really important concepts, and also respecting the dignity of all farmers and all who are involved in agricultural production. So we see this as a major responsibility on our behalf, and I want to now turn it over to Ron Rossman, who will bring a more grounded perspective as a farmer and a Catholic Rural Life board member.
Thank you, Jim. Very fine presentation. I would like to talk some about how climate change is affecting us as farmers and as people, but also about how farming systems such as ours, which happens to be organic, can affect climate change and lessen some of its impacts. You see here on my first slide that farmers are more willing, this is through research, I've read this through a survey, they're more willing to call it weather variability versus global warming or climate change because of political implications. It's so politically charged. Even though it seems to me that people that I talk to, generally speaking, say that even if we don't agree on what the causes of climate change are, we should still be moving towards alternative sources of energy for all our vehicles and et cetera, because fossil fuels will not last forever. So there does seem to be, at least in my mind, some agreement on that, but there is not much agreement, at least on the part of what you hear in the media about what that climate change is being caused by man and not just by variations of weather. So whatever we choose to call it, there has to be a recognition that how we use and conserve our natural resources, which I've listed here, which includes all of God's creation, how that affects our climate and future sustainability of our planet. For me, Laudato Si changes everything. For the first time, in a very profound way, it addressed the marriage of ecological and social justice, really for the first time, but in such a strong way, in such a beautiful way by our Pope Francis. Well, what does this mean, ecological and social justice? Basically, it just means care of God's creation and care of God's people. And especially the poor and the marginalized, because those folks do not have, generally speaking, the technological resources that they can deal with both the ecological and social. I'm getting a little echo.
Yeah, Ron, you may want to mute your mic.
Is this
Try it
better?
Better? Yes, much better. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
That field
That
you see in
field
this
you see in this slide.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm getting it.
I'm getting it.
Okay.
You're still
Okay.
getting the echo?
Yes, very much.
Very much.
Okay, then do it the other way. Switch your mic, turn your mic on and then
Okay.
mute your phone.
I'm back to the way
Back
it was.
the way it was.
Okay, now mute your phone. Okay, now use just your mic. Ron,
Is that better?
Not better?
can you speak louder?
Is that better?
Is that better?
We hear you, but we hear you kind of like on a delay.
Yeah, that's what I'm
That's
getting,
what I'm
and I don't know
I
how to
don't
change
know how
it.
to change it.
Okay, then let's go back to the audio. Switch your mic to audio for your phone and just use that.
That's what I'm
That's
doing.
what I'm doing.
Okay, let's see if that works.
I'll just keep
I'll
trying.
just keep trying.
This is a field of oats on our farm, and I'll move on here to the next slide. I just wanted to comment that science teaches us how the world works and attempts to answer the questions of when and how, but all of the rest of the questions of why and faith, we leave to faith and religion and theology and spirituality. And I have a degree in biology, and I can say very much so that science has strengthened my faith. It has not affected it in any negative way, because I feel very strongly that God has allowed our earth to evolve over these eons of time. Yet God is in charge in the sense that these basic elements that provide life, like carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and so forth, had to come from somewhere, and they just did not come from nothing. They came, as far as I'm concerned, they came from a very loving God. And that may be, a very basic thing, but it's a very basic thing for uniting science with our faith, because that is how we have to view our ecology and our social beings and our communities, which the Pope so eloquently talks about. So, if we respect and care for the earth, then we have to care and respect for God's people, all of God's peoples. Okay, next slide. Well, what is the premise? The premise is that we are mostly, through the burning of fossil fuels, rather quickly changing the climate. How is this being done? Well, as Jim said, it's through the release of CO2. That is a heat-trapping gas that is raising the temperature of the oceans in our atmosphere, this 1.53 degrees since 1880. So this has really been dramatically changing the CO2 levels since the Industrial Revolution, when those effects really started to take hold. Of course, the models predict that it's going to get worse this century. And, we all know what the effects of this are. A couple of the most obvious are the melting of the polar caps and rising sea levels and increasing temperatures, but also the extremes in weather. just a comment about that. As a farmer, I feel the effects of climate change every day. Just as an example, last week here we had 4 straight days in the 90s, and now this whole week it's been in the 40s and 50s and barely hitting 60 degrees. And we have our corn planted, but now it looks very yellow. It hasn't been growing, and some of it we are actually rotary hoeing today because it's having some trouble getting out of the ground because of this very cold weather. It wants to leaf out under the ground, and that will kill the plant, so we're rotary hoeing. Okay, so next slide. I want to say that climate change causes are not shared equally. This is why the poor and the marginalized get hit worse than us people that are so much more well off as far as daily conveniences. You see, 80% of global emissions come from just 20% of the world's population. And an average American leaves a carbon footprint that's 2,000 times larger than a person in poverty. Of course, we all know that consumption, our lifestyle choices, consumerism of all kinds, we are all guilty of this in some way. None of us have escaped that sin of consumption of, we all drive cars, we all use fossil fuels, we all buy products that use a lot of energy in their making, and we're really being called towards a much simpler lifestyle. Now, this next slide, I think, is the key to understanding climate change. It is simply the biochemical equation of photosynthesis. And it tells us so much about why climate change is happening. Now, this chemical equation reads that carbon dioxide plus water, CO2 plus H2O yields C6H12O6 plus oxygen. But this has to be in the presence of sunlight. But through chlorophyll, which is the green material in living plants, sunlight, along with carbon dioxide and water, produces all the chemical energy that sustains all of life. And of course, the reverse of this is respiration. In other words, when we breathe in, that is kind of like a plant does, is taking in CO2 and water and producing those sugars and oxygen. Well, when we breathe out, when plants respire and when all life forms respire, then we emit carbon dioxide and water. And so, the CO2 is a byproduct of cellular respiration. And when you burn fossil fuels for our energy use, CO2 is going to be emitted, just pure and simple. And so this heat and gases, which, there's heat and gas being produced, they are released that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, and that's why we call it the greenhouse gas effect, like a blanket over our Earth, and that's why our temperature is rising. So, there's a couple of core causes for this. One is deforestation or
your line is now unmuted.
I'd like to say the
degreening of farming. Now it's worse again. Pause.
Yes.
Now I'm echoing. It was fine.
Okay, just keep talking. I would just suggest that you may want to speed up a little bit because you have about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
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 Anyway, if we had a greener planet with more forests, more grass, more green, row crops covered by more green more of the year, we would have less climate change. And here you see how much of the estimates of climate change as far as greenhouse gases come from agriculture. Now, if you would add all the energy used to produce pesticides, fertilizer, etc., nitrous oxide, when you use that figure, it jumps to 25 to 30%. On the right there, you can see some of the things that can alleviate this. One is local foods, because there's less shipping, organic farming practices because of the regenerative nature of building soil, and with crop rotations, ecosystem services lower the need for pesticides, cover crops, composting, and biochar. Well, quickly, what we do on our farm. We have a lot of green on our farm. Over half of our 700 acres are in either grass, alfalfa, mixed forage hay. So right there, it's green most all of the year. And then we also grow corn and soybeans, but we grow oats and barley and wheat and peas. And then we have livestock, cattle and hogs. We plant a lot of trees, which provide so many services besides storing CO2. Can you hear me?
Your line is now unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Doing all kinds of funky things. Okay, so
now
we
can
control our weeds without pesticides to maintain good yields. And we have very good yields. Our yields are comparable to conventional farmers. But what I mean by that being positive for climate change is that it takes a lot of energy to make pesticides, and far more than we utilize by cultivating. It takes a lot more energy to produce fertilizer and chemicals than it does to use fossil fuel energy to cultivate. Plus, we're no-till on the planting here, as you can see on the right slide. We are what's called ridge tillers, which means we do not disturb the soil before we plant corn and soybeans. We no-till it with that planter that you saw. This is an example of combining soybeans. Many years our yields are better than the conventional neighbors because of the crop rotation effect. We don't just plant corn and soybeans all the time. We mix it up with the hay and the oats and the barley and so forth in longer term rotations. And then we do a lot of different cover crops, which again are meant to keep the ground green, and we use it for building our soil and for forages for our livestock. On the left there is annual rye. On the right is hairy vetch, following oats. Here we have a slide of organic hog production. We just built a hoop building, which is a beautiful way to raise hogs where we have access to the outdoors when the weather's good, but it's not a confinement system. The sows go in and out, and you can see they can be families. And our organic beef production is based on grass-fed beef with a little bit of grain at the end because that's what our customers prefer. But anyway, here you see cattle are out on the grass. They are not in confinement. Cattle on grass versus cattle in confinement would have a huge positive effect on lowering the effects of climate change. We also compost all of our manure, which is stabilizes it, and kind of leads me to this last thing of producing biochar, which is a process of storing carbon in the soil, which the emphasis here is on the capacity of the Earth's plants and soils to serve as a carbon sink. And we could get biochar from many, many sources, such as tree leaves, branches, crop byproducts, etc. And it would be a very powerful tool for storing carbon in the soil and for improving the depleted soils in poor climates. The reason I know something about this is that I've spent some time working in Honduras and Nicaragua. Through our local parishes, we have a partnership with a parish currently in Nicaragua that is ongoing, and I've been in Honduras quite a number of times. So with this, I will close, and we'll move on to the questions.
Your line is now unmuted.
Great. Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Jim. At this point, we're moving to the Q&A session, and I've got a few questions in the queue that folks have given me. The first one, it's not a question per se, but it's for Jim. On your slide number 7, you had a chart, the NOAA chart, and people want to know where they can see it, where they can find it, the source for it.
Oh, that's on the website for NOAA. And that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Okay, so if NOAA, and everybody's going to get a copy of the webinar, and when you see the webinar, you can pause that slide and you'll see the source at the bottom. I do notice that we're getting a little bit of echo, and it may be because we've got the presenters and myself with the mic on. So I'm sorry if that's happening. Got a question about, and it could be for either one of you. It has to do with composting and its use for lowering methane production. And the question really is about how much do we push composting at this point?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm going to mute myself for you.
Okay. Methane digesters are being utilized in Central America, for instance, in Nicaragua, as well as certainly in this country, but not as much as we should be. For instance, we don't have one, but they could be capturing the methane that is coming from the manure. I don't think composting is going to reduce the methane. We need a way to capture that methane, ideally.
Your line is now unmuted.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize, since I'm muting and unmuting, it's taking a few seconds there. I have a question here. It's a little complicated, but bear with me. What about the resource energy use, the ecological footprint of agriculture itself? How do we deal with, we are looking at the impacts of climate on agriculture, but what about agriculture's impact on climate? Jim, do you want to try that one?
Ron, why don't you take a stab at it and I'll add anything, because you're actually doing it.
Your line is now unmuted.
Jim?
Oh, I'm here. I
thought
I was wondering if Ron wanted
Right.
actually doing it.
So Ron, are you there?
I'm here. Am I in?
Yes. The basic question
Okay.
is, how are you adapting your practices to lower the ecological footprint of agriculture?
I've seen that various figures show for anywhere from 9 to 30% of climate change effect comes from agriculture. I think farming systems such as ours are on the lower end of that scale because we rely on regenerative practices and cover crops, longer-term rotations, keeping livestock out in the field, keeping the ground covered more and green all year, so that carbon dioxide can be used up, stored.
As a follow-up question, Ron, you have been successful in lowering the carbon footprint of your agricultural practices. Have you been successful in persuading your neighbors to also implement these kind of practices?
That would be a yes and no response. Organic agriculture keeps growing, but not as fast as it should be, partly because it's just too easy to rely on pesticides and fertilizers in the short term, but it's those long-term unintended consequences that are giving us grief. And I would say, although organic consumption is increasing by double digits every year for probably the last 25 years, unfortunately, organic production in this country, at least out here in the Midwest with farms that raise livestock and diversified corn and soybean crops like ours, is not increasing very much. Rather, that need is being filled by foreign countries, such particular countries of China, India, and Eastern European countries at this time.
Your line is now unmuted.
A question for either of the presenters. The question is, what are the stats on corporate versus family farming? Is corporate farming contributing more to climate change than family farming?
Pause.
Who wants to answer that?
Yeah,
Jim, you want to take it?
Sure. I think, the numbers I was presenting earlier, 89% are smaller family farms and the other 11% are much larger operations. I think that, as Ron can support, that every farmer and every whether you're a family or incorporated as a corporation or a larger operation, that with those larger operations, you've got more challenges in terms of how to implement more sustainable practices, and so I think it's more challenging in a very large operation. It's not impossible. There are also smaller farms that aren't implementing many sustainable practices and are also contributing to the problem. And I can cite both small farms doing great examples and larger farms doing lots of interesting strategies of implementing sustainable practices into their operations. So I think it's a shared contribution to the emission of CO2 gases, but it's obviously larger scale have more challenges in terms of it, but I don't have hard numbers to provide your listener with what % they're contributing.
Your line is now unmuted.
And kind of like a little bit of a follow-up, what is the best way for us as consumers to encourage sustainable farming? How do we encourage more people to do what Ron's doing?
I guess I'll take that first, or maybe we both can answer it.
Go ahead, Ron.
I would say the most obvious way is to buy local, kind of like the bumper sticker that says, think global, drink local, So, our family's really trying to do that. Like in our store here on the farm, our biggest customer base is right here in rural Shelby County, but yet we get a lot of people from Omaha, Nebraska, and other places. But we really are trying to change local people, and our prices are very comparable to that in the supermarket where you're buying non-organic products, because we realize the price has to be, a fair price. So, but I think as time goes on, we could have literally thousands of small farms around our large urban centers in this country that could be producing food for quality, good food, better tasting food, better quality food, fresher food for all those people, and that food would not be traveling such great distances. That's what I hope the future will be. Yes, we will have very large farms producing commodities. I don't think that's going to go away either, but I think there's going to be room for both, and there needs to be far more room for the kinds of farms such as ours and, much smaller farms, where maybe these farmers are getting income off that farm as well as a second job. And especially when you look at what's happening with technology, replacing people, I think we need to make a conscious effort as far as our policies go in this country, government policy, that we figure out how to keep people on the land, because there's a little bit of farmer in everybody. Everybody wants to grow things, just about everybody, find satisfaction in that. So I think it's a solution towards changing technologies that we recognize the beauty and the art and the need to farm.
Your line is now unmuted.
Thank you. Given the time, I don't think we're going to be able to get to all the questions, but I will share them with both presenters, and we will then respond individually to the folks that asked questions and we didn't get to them. At this point, I would like you to join me in thanking both Ron and Jim for their great presentations. If you want more information, you can either come to info@catholicclimatecovenant.org, or you can reach out to Jim directly at info@catholicrurallife.org, or to Ron, and he has said that he is willing to share his email. So there you have it, ron.rossman@gmail.com. So please feel free to reach out to any of us. And I'd like to thank you all for participating in this webinar today. I hope that it answered most of your questions. And as I said, we will be sending you the webinar and try to answer the questions individually. Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Jim, for being here.
Thank you, Paz.
Thank you, Paz.
And goodbye, everybody.